The alarm started at 4:12 Moscow time, a cold, metallic wail slicing through the corridors of the Soviet Air Defense Command Center in Murmansk. Technicians rushed to their consoles, boots hammering against concrete, eyes locking onto the glowing radar screens. A single track, long, needle-thin, and possibly fast, had appeared on the northern perimeter. The signature flickered, stabilized, then accelerated again. Faster than expected. Faster than predicted. Faster than anything the Soviet Union believed the Americans could fly at that altitude. The officers stared in silence. Because the object was already moving at speeds that should have torn any known airframe apart. For years the Soviets had heard rumors, an American reconnaissance aircraft capable of impossible performance, dark, angular, and nearly invulnerable. Its name appeared only in classified briefings and whispered conversations. Lockheed's State Route 71 Blackbird. A machine that outran missiles, outflew interceptors, and broke every rule the Soviet engineers understood about jet propulsion. But what the radar showed this morning was worse than rumor. Much worse. The target's velocity jumped again. Another spike. Another climb in altitude. The duty officer, Colonel Pavel Dryagin, leaned forward, knuckles white. Impossible! It's accelerating at that height. A lieutenant confirmed with trembling voice. Sir, estimates show Mach 3.1 and rising. Dryagin felt the air around him tighten. No aircraft could simply accelerate through the stratosphere like that. Not with standard turbojet engines. Not with any known propulsion system the Americans were rumored to possess. Yet the track was real. And it was heading straight toward the Kola Peninsula. Across the Soviet Arctic frontier, early warning radars lit up in a cascading chain, Omsk, Vorkuta, Tixi, each station reporting the same anomaly. The Blackbird was running faster with each scan, as if speed itself strengthened the aircraft instead of tearing it apart. Inside the Central Air Defense HQ near Moscow, General Viktor Mikhailovich's voice thundered across the operations floor. Scramble interceptors immediately. Get MiG-25 units airborne. Now! Sirens erupted across several northern bases. MiG-25 Foxbat pilots sprinted through freezing hangars, oxygen masks slapping against their chest rigs. Engines roared to life, afterburners flooding runways with violent pillars of fire. The Soviets knew the MiG-25 was one of the few aircraft capable of even approaching Mach 3, but only for minutes before catastrophic engine meltdown. Still, they had no choice. As the first pair of Foxbats launched, the radar technicians tracked the intruder again. Another spike. Another impossible rise. Mach 3.2. Mach 3.25. Climbing. The engineers stationed behind the main consoles exchanged horrified glances. They had spent years studying American engine technology. They knew the theoretical limits of titanium airframes. They knew the temperature constraints. None of this made sense. In the back of the room, a civilian specialist whispered to a colleague. The engines, they shouldn't function at this regime. Turbines would melt. Compressors would stall. This is not possible. But the radar signatures did not care about Soviet disbelief. High over the Barents Sea, the State Route 71, its fuselage shimmering in the cold upper atmosphere, maintained a steady, predatory course along the Soviet border. The crew aboard, calm and disciplined, monitored instruments as the aircraft smoothly transitioned from conventional jet thrust to ram effect compression, a design feature Soviet engineers had once dismissed as American exaggeration. But now the truth was unfolding in real time. The faster the aircraft flew, the more efficiently its engines worked. Back on the ground, the command center grew thick with tension. Voices overlapped. Air defense battalions reported readiness. Missile operators requested launch authorization. Radar officers struggled to predict the Blackbird's next maneuver. Yet the State Route 71 was not attacking. It was watching. Observing. Probing weaknesses. And the Soviets hated nothing more than not understanding an enemy's capabilities. As the Foxbat interceptors climbed through 60,000 feet, their pilots reported extreme vibrations. Control sluggish, engines overheating. Temperature warning, Right engine approaching limit. Requesting permission to throttle back. The ground commander refused. Negative. Maintain pursuit. We must push the intruder southward. But the MiG-25s were not pursuing. They were being left behind. The radar operators confirmed it. The gap between the Fox-Bats and the intruding aircraft widened, slowly at first, then rapidly, as the Blackbird casually climbed past Mach 3.3. Colonel Dryagen gripped his headset. How is it accelerating during a turn? That defies every model. A scientist from the Aircraft Design Bureau stepped forward, pale and sweating. If this is the Blackbird, it uses a hybrid engine system. Part turbojet, part ramjet. The intake design, it might be redirecting shockwaves to compress air more efficiently at high speeds, turning drag into thrust. General Mihailovich glared. Meaning? Meaning, the Americans built an engine that wins by going faster. They designed their weaknesses into strengths. A chilling realization spread across the command staff. Every second the aircraft gained speed, it wasn't approaching failure, it was approaching peak performance. Far above them, the SR-71's crew listened to the distant echoes of Soviet radio traffic. They understood the panic unfolding below. They had seen it before in Vietnam, in the Middle East, over the Mediterranean. But the Soviets were different. Their radar nets were dense, their interceptors fast, their missile batteries lethal. Flying here was a high-stakes game. But this mission was essential. New Soviet missile deployments. New naval activity. New technology developing beyond the Arctic Circle. Washington needed answers. And the State Route 71 was the only aircraft that could touch the edge of Soviet airspace, gather intelligence, and escape untouched. Inside the Soviet command center, tension peaked when the radar screens flickered. The American aircraft was transitioning, changing angle, tightening its path, accelerating again. Mach 3.32. Mach 3.35. Mach 3.38. Such speeds should have triggered disintegration. Instead, the aircraft stabilized, smooth and confident. A technician shouted over the noise. Sir, the engines, they're running better at this speed. Fuel efficiency curve is improving. Heat signature is stabilizing. The room fell silent. Because this was the very thing Soviet engineers had insisted was impossible. The SR-71's engines were becoming more efficient the faster they went. General Mihailovich's voice broke the silence. If that aircraft crosses into our border at these speeds, we will be unable to stop it. We won't even have time to scramble a second wave. But the crisis wasn't over. The Blackbird, now at the edge of Soviet airspace, suddenly banked south, toward a forbidden zone, an area where the Soviets kept one of their most guarded secrets, a missile range facility unknown to NATO intelligence. The intruder was now heading straight toward it. The Soviet High Command erupted. Officers shouted. Telephones rang. Radios crackled. And then the order was given, a step the Soviets had avoided for years. Prepare long-range intercept missile batteries. Authorization pending. The atmosphere shifted instantly. This was no longer a simple incursion. This was the brink of a Cold War flashpoint. The order moved through Soviet communication channels like a spark racing through dry tinder. Deep in the fortified bunkers near Arkhangelsk, missile crews snapped to readiness. Clamshell silo doors rumbled open, revealing towering long-range interceptors, their guidance systems humming to life. The Soviet command structure, usually rigid, controlled, predictable, had shifted into something frantic, improvisational, and dangerously unstable. Because the target they were preparing to fire upon was not just fast. It was rewriting their understanding of aviation in real time. Above them, the State Route 71 maintained its merciless glide toward the restricted zone. Even at Mach 3.4, its instruments remained steady. The cockpit lighting cast long reflections across titanium panels. The pilot, calm but vigilant, adjusted the throttle as the inlet spikes automatically calibrated airflow. At these speeds, the engines were effectively functioning as ramjets, gulping atmospheric pressure that would destroy any normal turbine. He monitored the Soviet radio traffic, unmistakably escalating, undeniably panicked. Below, the Soviet Air Defense Command Center reached a boiling point. General Mihailovich slammed his fist onto the operations table. They know exactly what they're doing. They're probing our most protected site. A wave of tension cut through the room. Engineers, analysts, and officers crowded around the central radar display. The track representing the Blackbird stretched further south than any previous American reconnaissance flight. No U.S. aircraft had ever approached this sensitive sector without triggering a full-scale Soviet response. Colonel Dryagin leaned close to the general. If they get imagery of that facility, our entire new missile program is compromised. Then we must stop them, the general replied. Whatever it takes. But the harsh truth hung in the air. How do you stop something you can't catch? At 70,000 feet, the pair of MiG-25 interceptors reached their operational limits. Their airframes groaned. Metal expanded under blistering heat. Engines howled under temperatures far beyond safe thresholds. Inside their cockpits, the pilots fought growing alarms, fuel pressure fluctuations, compressor surge warnings, and creeping red line indicators. One pilot's voice cracked over the radio. "Ground, we are overheating. Request permission to disengage." "Denied," came the reply. "Maintain pursuit." "But sir, that is an order." The Fox-bats pushed forward, but they were fading. The State Route 71 was pulling away effortlessly, as if gravity and air resistance played by different rules for the American aircraft. Back on the ground, radar operators updated their readouts. Mach 3.4 increasing, altitude rising, turning slightly to the southeast. The turn triggered another wave of confusion. A scientist from the Central Aerohydrodynamics Institute stepped closer, watching the telemetry with wide eyes. "No aircraft should maintain stability during a turn at this velocity. The stress should be catastrophic." The technician beside him whispered the unthinkable. "Unless their inlet cones are redirecting the shock compression to increase thrust during maneuvers." The scientist nearly choked. "That would mean, the faster it flies, the more efficient it becomes." Silence gripped the engineering staff. Because this realization meant something far more terrifying than raw speed. It meant the Americans had solved high Mach airflow management, an engineering brick wall the Soviet Union had repeatedly smashed into. While the command center processed this revelation, another alert sounded. A loud, urgent klaxon, the kind reserved for only the most severe intrusions. The Blackbird had just crossed into a zone only 55 kilometers from the classified missile facility. Every senior officer froze. General Mihailovich turned sharply to the Missile Division liaison. "Status?" The liaison swallowed. "Batteries loaded. Target locked. Awaiting final firing authorization." The general hesitated. Shooting down the Blackbird risked escalating tensions with the United States, possibly sparking a retaliation. But letting it escape with high-resolution imagery of the secret site would jeopardize a decade of Soviet research. He whispered, almost to himself, "What is Washington playing at?" But the decision time was shrinking. The Blackbird was approaching its closest point. At the same moment, 100 kilometers to the west, a second pair of MiG-25s scrambled. Their takeoff shook the runway as their engines consumed fuel at a monstrous rate. They climbed rapidly, aiming to intercept from an angle the first pair could not reach. The pilots breathed hard through their oxygen masks, aware that their aircraft were being pushed far beyond their design tolerances. Inside the primary command bunker, the atmosphere darkened. Officers barked updates. Phones rang. Printers spat out threat assessment sheets. The lights flickered from the massive electrical draw of radar stations now working at emergency bandwidth. Every display showed the same reality. The State Route 71 was running circles around the Soviet Union's most advanced intercept network. Colonel Dryagin exhaled slowly. "Comrade General, if we fire, we risk war. If we don't..." He gestured toward the maps. "They will know everything." General Mihailovich closed his eyes for a moment, calculating, projecting outcomes, weighing catastrophe against catastrophe. When he opened them, his decision had crystallized. "Prepare to fire," he said. "But hold until my command." The missile crews awaited the final code. Outside, the Arctic winds howled over concrete silos. Hydraulic systems hissed. Engines warmed. Targeting radars locked onto the incoming aircraft. Operators sat with trembling fingers on the firing switches. Back in the sky, the SR-71's systems detected multiple new radar paints, more aggressive, sharper, unmistakably missile-tracking signatures. The pilot exchanged a quick glance with his reconnaissance systems officer. "They're preparing to fire," the RSO said. "That means we've flown exactly where they didn't want us," the pilot replied. But the tension was rising rapidly. They still needed one more pass, one more sweep, one more moment over the restricted zone. Inside the Soviet command center, the scientists gathered in a trembling huddle around the latest telemetry. One engineer muttered, "How is it maintaining structural integrity? The skin temperature must be near 600 degrees Celsius. Another murmured, "Their fuel system, it must cool the airframe. It has to be circulating like a heat exchanger. And the engines," a third added, "the engines are thriving at Mach 3.4. I can't explain it." No one could. Because the Americans had built something that defied the rules everyone else was forced to obey. General Mihailovich's aide leaned in with a fresh update. "Comrade General, the Blackbird is accelerating again." Mihailovich spun. "What? It's already past maximum theoretical limits." "Nevertheless. Mach 3.45 and increasing." The room erupted. Shouts. Arguments. Shock. No Soviet model accounted for this. No Soviet aircraft could chase this. No missile battery could guarantee a hit on something moving at this velocity and altitude, even with a perfect lock. Yet the Blackbird kept coming. The general's face hardened. "All batteries, prepare for immediate launch authorization." The codes were transmitted. Operators took their final positions. The missiles awaited the final command. Outside, the first exhaust plumes ignited inside their silos. Inside the sky, the State Route 71 began its critical turn. And then, every radar station across the sector registered the same terrifying surge. Mach 3.47. Mach 3.49. Mach 3.52. The Blackbird's engines were now performing at their peak, hotter, stronger, and more efficient than at any lower speed. Total disbelief filled the command center. And then it happened. A sudden, violent alarm screamed through the bunker. "Target within firing solution. Await final order." General Mihailovich stared at the screen. He had seconds to decide. The Soviet commander prepares to give the most consequential launch command of his career, while the State Route 71 races directly into the kill zone. The command bunker fell into a suffocating stillness. Even the hum of machinery seemed to retreat as every officer, engineer, and technician fixed their eyes on General Mihailovich. The Blackbird was now inside the lethal envelope of the Soviet intercept grid. The missile crews were locked in. The launch codes were armed. The decision, fire or hold, rested on a single man's word. On the central radar display, the SR-71's icon pulsed steadily, accelerating with a confidence that felt almost taunting. Mach 3.53. Mach 3.55. Mach 3.57. A speed no Soviet air defense system had ever faced in combat conditions. The general's voice finally cut through the silence. "Stand by, stand by." His hesitation rippled through the entire command structure. Officers exchanged nervous glances. Some feared his caution would allow the Americans to breach one of the most secret facilities in the Soviet Union. Others silently prayed he would avoid the strike that could ignite a geopolitical inferno. But the Blackbird did not wait. High above, the aircraft banked sharply, executing a maneuver so clean, so impossibly smooth at that altitude, that the Soviet radar officers recoiled in disbelief. The inlet cones shifted with mechanical precision, shockwaves folding perfectly into the engine's intakes. Instead of slowing the aircraft, the turn fed the very system that propelled it. Inside the cockpit, the RSO called out the readings. Inlet pressure stable. Shock boundary nominal. Sensors green. The pilot nodded. One more pass. Make it count. On the ground, radar screens flared as the State Route 71 made its tightest approach yet. The restricted facility, hidden deep in the Arctic landscape, protected by layers of secrecy and miles of isolation, was now exposed to the most advanced reconnaissance platform ever built. Its missile prototypes, testing infrastructure, experimental warhead designs, all vulnerable to a single, high-speed sweep. General Mihailovich realized the Americans would not simply glance at the facility. They would photograph everything. And at that altitude, at that velocity, every frame would be crystal clear. His jaw tightened. Fire on my command. Missile crew commanders leaned over their consoles, fingers poised. Then, another spike. Mach 3.60. Mach 3.62. The technicians practically shouted over each other. Sir, its acceleration is increasing despite the sustained turn. Thermal readings stabilizing. Unbelievable. It's becoming more efficient the longer it holds this speed. One engineer whispered helplessly. It shouldn't be possible. The engines should be choking on their own shockwaves. Another, pale, added. They've weaponized the laws of physics. But the general had no time for scientific astonishment. Prepare to. He stopped. The radar screens began flickering with unpredictable returns. Not noise. Not interference. But the unmistakable distortion caused when a high Mach aircraft sheds a wake of superheated air so violently that radar waves scatter unpredictably. Every station reported it at once. Tracking unstable. Telemetry fluctuating. We are losing lock, reacquiring. The general stepped closer. What is happening? The senior radar specialist swallowed hard. Comrade General, the Blackbird is outrunning our tracking algorithms. For a moment, the general didn't understand. Then the specialist clarified, voice trembling. It's not just flying faster than our missiles, it is flying faster than our computers can predict. A wave of disbelief rippled through the bunker. Even the calculating, hardened Mihailovich felt the ground shift beneath him. The Soviets had always assumed that sheer volume, more radar sites, denser networks, faster missiles, would guarantee superiority. But none of that mattered if the target simply lived in a different category of motion. Outside, the missile crews could feel the tension from inside their cramped steel chambers. The target indicators blinked erratically. Lock-on lamps flickered. The automatic guidance system struggled to maintain a firm track. And then, the firing authorization tone dropped. The lock was gone. Reacquire! The general barked. Now! The crews tried. They fought the systems. They pushed every manual override. But the State Route 71 was now so fast, so high, and so deep into the limits of Soviet radar physics that the return signal began to shatter into fragments. Inside the bunker, alarms screamed. Not for intrusion. Not for incoming fire. For computational overload. The Blackbird had essentially broken the prediction models. General Mihailovich could only watch as the target slipped into the one domain the Soviets never believed an aircraft could reach. Untrackable speed. Above, in the cockpit, the RSO finished the final sweep. All imagery complete. Target area fully mapped. Copy, the pilot replied. Turning outbound. The State Route 71 rolled gently, no panic, no rush, no sense of danger, just the unwavering control of a machine designed to defy pursuit. Back below, the second wave of MiG-25s finally climbed into the intercept corridor. But the pilots immediately realized how hopeless their position was. Ground control, target is impossible to match. We see vapor trail. Very high. Very far. Climbing to max, temperatures rising, this is not sustainable. Their radar returns confirmed the truth. The Blackbird was already slipping beyond detection range. The lead pilot muttered through clenched teeth. How do you fight something that runs faster the more you chase it? No one answered. Inside the command center, the atmosphere shifted from adrenaline to cold dread. Engineers huddled around their data, flipping through printouts of temperature curves, airflow predictions, intake dynamics, none of which matched what they had just witnessed. One muttered, "If an aircraft becomes more efficient as it accelerates, if drag becomes thrust, if shockwaves become part of the engine cycle." Another finished the thought, "Then we were never in the same race." Colonel Dryagen looked to the general. "Comrade General, we must inform the Defense Ministry." The general's voice was hollow. "Yes." He stared at the fading return on the screen, the last ghostly trace of the American aircraft that had exposed their deepest weakness. Not in weapons, not in numbers, but in understanding. Hours later, in a sealed Moscow briefing room, a stunned panel of Soviet scientists and military officials listened as the Northern Command presented their findings. The final conclusion chilled everyone present. The Americans had achieved a propulsion breakthrough the Soviet Union could not match. An aircraft that outran missiles, outflew interceptors, defied engineering limits, and performed better not by avoiding extreme conditions, but by embracing them. One senior scientist murmured the words that would haunt the Soviet aerospace community for years. "We built machines that fight against the air. They built one that dances with it." That line spread quietly through Soviet design bureaus, whispered by engineers who had spent decades trying to understand Cold War disparities. The political fallout came next: urgent directives, frantic research orders, accelerated programs. But deep down, the Soviet High Command recognized the truth. The State Route 71 represented a frontier they might never reach. And in the classified archives of Soviet air defense, the final line of the report stood untouched for decades. The intruder escaped untouched. Speed was its armor. Physics was its ally. And our understanding was its greatest advantage. The Cold War would continue. The rivalry would intensify. But the memory of this single flight, the night when Soviet engineers watched an aircraft grow stronger the faster it fled, never left them. Even years later, when the Blackbird retired, its shadow still lingered, a silent reminder of a machine that, for one brief moment, outran the world itself.